Hi there, it's Dr. JOYLYN Sparkles and welcome to your Power Hour. This is your time to put what's on your mind on my mind, and we'll put our heads and hearts together and we will come up with a way to go from stuck to happy as fuck in as short amount of time as possible. Your time is valuable. We have wasted enough time thinking mean, negative, awful things about ourselves. It is time for a different reality. And I am back from an amazing trip and I missed you while I was away. I will say it does help to be distracted by some long airport flights as far as remembering that it was a happy hour day. But here I am back, transformed. Can you tell? And you might not know, even from the pace of my speech, not caffeinated today. So I'm just that enthusiastic about talking to you about what happens when nothing is working. Okay, because we got a couple of people, myself included, who have been noticing that there's been some experiences where you've been doing this stuff for a while. You've been processing, doing your shadow work, noticing patterns. But what about those days when you get stuck and it's crunchy and you might even be able to remember a tool or two and you use them and it doesn't work and it almost seems like things get worse even though you're trying to make them better? What then? Let's talk about that. I will start talking about my favorite subject, me. And though you might not guess it, that this lovely being, here I'm putting this on the computer screen so I can see if there is questions coming in, it's easier for me to read, that there have been many days, even in the recent months, and I've been doing this work for decades now, okay? But waking up and not actually being able to get out of bed because I am not lit up or on fire about my life. I wonder, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of all of this? Am I making a difference? And sometimes even hating on my life, and sometimes, and this is weird because I recognize it's so old, wishing I was someone else. I don't know that, and now to me it even seems weird coming out of my mouth because I'm me, so how could you be anyone else? But there was a time, especially in my 20s, where I desperately just wished I was someone else because it seemed that everyone else was cooler and better and having a better life experience than I was, even though I knew intimately some people's problems, whether I was related to them or close friends, but still thinking that their lived experience and who they could become, their potential and what they had going for them was better than me. And sometimes that has been crossing my mind lately. And sometimes even knowing that though we're transforming in a spiral, sometimes those old things, when there's a really deep thing, you can kind of go with it a little bit longer than you should. But anyway, in November and December, so one time it happened, my lease is gonna come and I'm thinking about moving to the coast. So I was looking for apartments. So this is the first time. And that evening, I spiraled down the downward spiral and I ended up crying for 4 hours straight. I had crystals on my eyelashes. My head hurt so bad. My eyes were so puffy the next day. And what's also interesting, funny not funny, is when I returned from Turkey, having an amazing trip, the very next day, I'm somehow sliding down the tubes, having just such an internal struggle, trying to hold myself up and end up again crying for a couple of hours and falling asleep with a really bad headache. And I started to look at this and say, you know, this doesn't seem right. Like, I've done shadow work for a long time. I coach people in this, and it just seems here recently it's almost getting worse. How can that be? And remembering to use my tools. And it just seems that I'm getting more reactive and trying and trying and trying, to where EFT wasn't working, taking a shower or taking a bath. I tried both of those, not the same day. Meditating, and I ended up getting like more amped up instead of calmer. Journaling, and it wasn't working, to where everything that I was trying just wasn't getting the needle to move. There wasn't movement. And you've probably had some of these days too, to where you know when you've been able to use these tools and there seemed to be some opening and release. And then somehow when you're in this kind of spaz, it almost seems like everything's making it worse. And so I noticed two things about this. The first one was that these were coming at the end of or immediately following a good day, to where things had been kind of flowing, and then all of a sudden there's like this dramatic crash. And especially the one after Turkey, I did know to some extent there was an exhaustion reaction because the travel, and jet lag and things like that, and being dehydrated on the plane, that I was like, okay, that's probably some of it. Or it would be after a conversation with somebody who's struggling with something that I had historically struggled with. In one case, one woman was talking to me about a relationship she just got out of with a narcissist. And it wasn't a client. And I'll talk to you about why that's important. But just somebody in conversation was talking about an ex-boyfriend struggle she was having. And so I had those two things where I was like, okay, I kind of notice that these really bad days are coming after good days, or when I'm reintroduced to something historical. So I kind of just let that sit there. And a couple of days later, I wish it was immediate, but it was a couple of days later when there's been a little bit of space. And here's one thing. When you're in those really negative things and all your tools aren't working, please, at the very least, hold on to the truth that it won't last forever and that it's not the truth of you. And we'll get to that again. I'm going to reinforce that again. But it is not true of you or your life and what your life is going to become. And it's going to pass, to where sometimes all you have to do is breathe, get into the next 5-minute segment of your life, go to sleep, and when you wake up, it will be different. It just won't be so intense, okay? But I noticed that in this, I actually had to admit to some emotional addiction still going on. I have had, and now apparently still, some of the lingering things, because this is always healing. This is always about where we can love ourselves more and how we can love ourselves deeper and better and get out of this completely. And when we're spiraling and we're getting into the deeper things, that there's still little fragments and remnants of emotional addiction going on, to where I'm very used to feeling unhappy. I very much know how to. There's almost like a chemical comfort zone there. And I know how to process hard stuff. And I know that I can get through it. So it's sometimes I can even see how I can call it in so that I remember who I am. And that I'm a tough person. And that I'm badass. And that I can do this thing. And that I'm not afraid of negative feelings. And that I'm not a spiritual bypasser. And so there's been some emotional addiction to this because I know myself as a learner and a processor, to where I've actually become chemically, what's the word? I can't think of the word. Anyway, my chemistry is conditioned. I've become habituated to that chemistry. And then you pair that with something that a lot of us have, which is a dysfunctional childhood. It very much matches a lot of that stress chemistry. It's just because we're getting better at boundaries and doing more things that light us up and using our tools and perhaps even eating healthier, that our chemistry is changing, but it's not quite sustainable, to where we need a little bit more stress in our lives and happiness is still maybe just a little bit weird and off, to where this is how we know how to call in the old familiar is, and we'll call it in a big way. So this brought on a lot of stress chemistry to put me right back into a chemical comfort zone that isn't actually comfortable, but something that I'm very familiar with. And I had to see that that was going. I had to acknowledge that that was part of what was playing out. Also, there's just a habit, an identity. I knew myself very much for a long time as broken. And I can't tell you how many times, even now, in the last 3 months, how many times I've prefaced sentences being, I know I'm a work in progress. I know I'm not perfect, but. And I've been hearing this more and more in people speaking, is prefacing about how they're not perfect, how they are working. To where we need to start looking again at our identity and what we're identifying with. What would be wrong with being perfect? In truth, we actually are, because we're actually divine. And it's almost that if we say that we're perfect, that somehow we're actually then going to totally let us off our hooks, which you guys, being the high achievers that you are, would never totally let yourselves off the hook with less than your best. Okay, so let's relax a little bit and maybe actually start getting comfortable with actually being okay. And actually being a work in progress as perfection. As our perfection right now is being in process, in progress. To where we don't have to state it for somebody else. Because really, in truth, we're stating it for ourselves almost to sometimes let us off the hook, to be sloppy, to be lazy. Well, I know I'm a work in progress, so I don't have to try as hard as I absolutely could with this habit or that habit. Or I know I'm not perfect, so I'm going to continue to be imperfect and not actually strive to do my very best here. Or I'm afraid that you won't love me, so let me put right out there that I know there's reasons to not love me, but maybe you'll love me anyway. That's what we're really saying. And it's actually not loving to ourselves, to where perhaps maybe we just start anchoring in the knowing, the acknowledgement of the truth of duality here, which is we are both perfect and in progress at the same time at every moment of our waking, breathing experience here on earth. Okay? So, but in that, do we have a habit of being broken? Of knowing ourselves as broken, as shit shows, dumpster fires, hot messes, which sometimes can be funny to say. And then sometimes we just start to identify with them and become them. And then anytime we're actually firing on all cylinders, it's a surprise to us. So we have to call back in that shit. Are we doing that to ourselves? It's time to actually just get real and see, are we doing this? Have we just had a day that's too good? Have we just up-leveled and don't know how to handle it and we're calling this shit in? Okay? That might be one of the reasons why this is happening. Another reason that you might be getting this level of intensity, and especially when nothing is working to actually create an opening, is because it isn't yours. You can't change anything that isn't yours to change. There's another possibility that I'll get to at the very end, so we've actually got 3. But when it's not yours, and you're picking it up, and you're carrying another burden that actually wasn't meant for you, it's either a weight that's too heavy, it's an inappropriate exercise, and I'm talking about spiritual exercises, to get you to be more you. It's just not a fit. Now what's happening is, it's happening subconsciously. Because none of us would be like, oh, you're going through this really tough time, let me emotionally process this for you, and that'll make it better. Because when you say that out loud, you're like, that doesn't even make sense and that doesn't sound like fun. And am I going to get paid for this? Do I know how to do this? Is it actually going to help this other person? Okay, so this isn't happening consciously. These aren't conversations we're having with people. This is subconscious, unconscious patterning and programming at play and how we're doing this. And the reason that it's happening so frequently, so often, and why it can happen at all is because you've been trained to do this. This is part of your survival skill set that you got from your dysfunctional childhood. Because your dysfunction, your ability to survive was to make sure that somebody else was okay. And so you plugged into their universe and did anything and everything you could to give them your energy to help them process and progress so that you could stay alive. So as an empath, you're just very energetically attuned and sensitive to other people and have a kind, caring heart to where you're trying to lighten the load. And we've talked about, like part of humanity here is when the weight is distributed, nothing feels as heavy. So you are energetically trying to help someone else by taking on burden. It just doesn't work on the energetic levels. The other thing too, if you're a woman, this is also how women care. Unconsciously, this is how we are gender role trained. And if you read Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, it's actually a really good book for beginning to understand the differences between men and women. But even with women to women, we tend to try to feel things for other people, but it doesn't actually work. Because when we do it, it actually communicates to that other person, I don't trust that you can handle this. That's actually what the communication is. And again, if we were conscious of this, that's not what we want to convey. But that's why a lot of times these things blow up in our face. And then energetically, it doesn't work because we all have these soul contracts and we say, hey, I want to have this experience and this experience so I understand this on a greater level, so I learn how to get out from under this, so I learn how to set myself free, so I can see how to love myself better, because that's what we all came here for, right? To where you can't take that experience away from somebody else, and if you do, there'll end up being resentment, but it's also not yours to change. So no matter what you do, it doesn't change. That might be a big reason why nothing you try is working. It's not actually yours to change. So I'll tell you about that night, especially the one where I was crying. My face and my head hurt so bad. I wonder if I even looked like myself. I don't know. The only thing that worked that night was grounding. I actually got a rock in my hand and sat down to meditate, and that was the only thing that worked because it was the only time I actually had an intention to reconnect with myself and what was true. Everything else I was doing to try to make the feeling go away or to make it stop or to make it better. So that number one, a lot of the stuff that I was trying to alleviate wasn't mine. It was coming from an energetic dynamic of a conversation I had earlier. It was old stuff from the past that I'd actually already healed that I was trying to pick up again. It was other factors and other people's and relationships that were going on in my life. And it was also making the problem the reference point to my life. And so everything was about making it go away, making it better. None of these things are true to me. So that nothing I do is actually going to work because it doesn't have anything to do with me. So here's something that's going to help. And it's also one of the things that when things aren't working and none of your tools work and no matter what you try, everything gets worse, is because it's not yours in the first place. You're actually trying to emotionally process somebody else's experience. It might be that it's a habit. It's who you've known yourself as, and it's a way to call back familiar old chemical comfort zones when you've actually up-leveled. And in that might be that you are refusing to let joy express itself. Because when you're trying to process things that aren't you, when you're carrying things that aren't yours to carry, and you're being someone who's not you, it immediately calls into question, well, who am I then? How do I know? Because all this stuff is happening on an subconscious or unconscious level. So how do I know when I'm being me? Because especially when it's this habit, this is who I've known myself as a broken basket case or a dumpster fire. Like, how do I know? What is yours? When you're being you, there is a lightness to you. You're light. You are whole. You're healthy. You're healed. You're worthy. And you know it. So that when you're having those days, you're firing on all cylinders. You're just in the flow. Even when things kind of come at you, they kind of like hit you and fall off because they don't stick. And you don't pull them into your system. They can either fall off or flow through you because you're congruent with yourself. And as that, you're happy and joyful. Now with that doesn't ever mean that you'll never feel negative feelings. But when there is sadness or anger or disgust or even guilt, and it's actually yours, there will still be an underlying aliveness to it. And you're going to be in a sense of connection to where you're going to know what action to take, and you're actually more likely to take it. And when you take the action, it's actually going to change things. So sometimes you're just like, well, I wish I could know all this at the beginning. Sometimes you don't know until you try. But if you actually take an action and things actually start to open up and resolve, it was yours. Because there are sometimes guilt can be a distractor implant. We can go in there and go into those chemical comfort zones. But sometimes there's guilt because we know we were out of congruence with ourselves. We said something that we know we didn't mean. We said something to hurt somebody's feelings that we actually care about. Or even somebody we don't care about, but we know that we did that and we don't feel good about that. We feel guilty. But then we apologize, we acknowledge what we did, and we take corrective action. That guilt starts to alleviate itself. But when it's this guilt for being alive, for being human, for not being perfect already, that's the bullshit that no matter what you do, it isn't going to go away because it's not yours. It doesn't have an aliveness component. It doesn't have a clear action that's going to help move it out of your system. Okay? Do you kind of see the difference? So there's going to be an aliveness to where you're happy and you're joyful when you're you, to where even when you're angry or sad, you're almost going to have a delight in your humanity, in knowing that you're feeling the whole spectrum of yourself. And because sometimes sad is just grieving something that was very precious to you and that it's no longer available in the same way. That's just a beautiful experience. And when it's really yours, there's actually going to be an underlying appreciation and also acknowledgement that I had that. It was beautiful. I can have it again. It's not gone forever. And it'll lead to a curiosity of, well, I wonder, it left, so I wonder what's going to take its place. It's going to be good. Okay, that's how we know when we're being ourselves, when we're really congruent with who we are, this divine, whole, healthy, freaking amazeballs human being, divine spirit we are. Okay? But when it's hot and heavy, and it's really intense, and you can't tell the difference, here's some things you can kind of just do a little checklist. Do I like me? If I'm hating on me in my life, I'm not being me, and what I'm working with probably is not true to me. It's either not mine, it's too old, or it's just not true. Do I feel at ease with it? Meaning, do I feel like I can even handle it? Does it make sense for anything that's going on in and around me? Like to where at first when I was kind of feeling crunchy when I got back from my trip, there was ease with it because I was like, I have been up for over 22 hours because I couldn't fall asleep on the plane, and I'm dehydrated, I kind of know I'm not going to feel tip-top. That's okay if I'm a little extra tired, but then as the day wore on, it got a little bit. But at the beginning, there was actually ease with it because it sort of made sense for what was going on with my life. It's okay. But then when it sort of shifts off of that and just like becomes an entity in and of itself, and there's no ease and it's very reactive and I've got to make this stop and it has to stop right now and make it go away, we're out of congruence with ourselves. We're not dealing with something that is ours that's changeable for us, or that we need to change even, because that's not what's going on. Is anything working? Sometimes actually taking action is how we're going to get the information. We can't do everything up here, even though we'd like to, and even though we were gifted kids, and even though this has been a safer place to live than our bodies growing up, we can't do everything in between the ears. Sometimes we actually have to take action. So sometimes it's not until you take a salt bath, until you meditate, until you light a candle and say Om, or go for a jog, or eat 8 cookies. You know, it's not until you actually take an action and give it a little bit of pause to be like, that didn't work, that didn't work. And sometimes you have to find the right tool for the job, and the same one doesn't work. There's not a one-size-fits-all. But after you've tried a couple of things, and especially if it's just not the tool for the job, but you're still in congruence with yourself, you are more willing to be like, okay, let me try this, and there's still an ease and flow to it. But when it's this doesn't work and you get more and more reactive, it's not yours. Something else is it, and it's just time to drop it. Then there's always, and recognizing that you can start to put this one closer to the top of the list. That's the epiphany, aha, I got that I'm giving you now. You can always ask. And this is where I talk a lot about questions as tools. Questions as tools, meaning they can actually open things up and make things better. And the magic question is, who does this belong to? Is this even mine? Now, in the system that I learned this in, and if you are a highly intellectualized individual, you might immediately follow, well, whose is it? And if you've gone to a lot of therapy and you're used to processing and you like good stories and narratives and are used to, and your brain's really highly active, you might have a natural proclivity to go to there. Don't. It's a waste of time. It doesn't matter. You're only right maybe half of the time, and it actually doesn't matter. What's magical about this question is you just immediately recognize whether it's yours or not. And when it's not yours, you just let it go and you return it to whoever it belongs to. Because here's the thing. When we're trying to take on somebody's experience and process something for somebody else, we're actually robbing them of the full weight and intensity of the experience that they actually knew on a soul level that they needed in order to create and change. Now again, you can never be more important or better or more special or keep anybody from doing anything. So you've got that going for you. But we can sort of dilute or dampen or hinder other people's processes in our own reactionary, okay? So anyway, you just let it go. It's almost like you got Aladdin's lamp. Not a good lamp though. But when you drop it, it breaks and it just goes back to whoever it needs to go to. Is it mine? Nope, not mine. Okay, it goes. And how I've started to visualize it that works the best is, and here's the other thing about this tool, who does it belong to? So that you're actually curious, is this mine to process? And pause. Pause is the point of power. Give it at least a couple of milliseconds to let the awareness come in. Because what I have also done poorly is, who does this belong to? 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 There's no space for any awareness to actually come in. I'm actually just using it as a mantra and ramping myself up instead of calming myself down. So who does this belong to? At least take a breath. Who does this belong to? And sometimes play with it. Who does this belong to? 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 Like, play with it. You can use it, but give it a little bit of space. And here's all that it's really gonna, sometimes, every once in a while, you might get a hit of who it is and then just say, okay, return to sender. Know that it's never throwing it back at them, fuck you, you gave this to me, because they didn't. You actually agreed and consented and maybe even pulled it away from them when they didn't want you to, okay? So it's not that anybody did this to you. You happen to things don't happen to you, okay? So there is no blame here. But if you get a hit, that's what you do, return it to sender. It's not going to hurt them. It's what their soul needs in order to evolve in their own way, okay? You're actually giving them a gift by giving them back what is theirs, okay? Then, a lot of times, all you're going to get is when you ask, who does this belong to? You just get a sense that it's not yours. Oh, who does this belong to? I don't know, but I oddly feel like I lost one wrinkle on my forehead. Who does this belong to? Nothing comes up, but all of a sudden I have a deeper breath when I had real shallow breathing before. Who does this belong to? Nothing comes up. My mind's totally blank, but it seems like I don't need to cry anymore. Who does this belong to? I don't know. Nothing comes up, and if I go in my head, I feel stupid, but somehow there's like this calm and I feel like I can go to sleep. That's how you know the tool is working. So it's not always an intellectual process. And if you're trying to use it as a way to know something, that's not what it's about. It's actually just to acknowledge, I've picked up stuff that isn't mine. And what I've done, though, to visualize this, to actually make it work for me a little bit better, to get out of my head, is I ask, who does this belong to? And I kind of just, in my mind, I lose a jacket. Like I have like 18 jackets on, you know, because I pick up stuff that's not mine all the time. I'm a woman, I'm an empath, you know, I do these things. So who does this belong to? Oh, I can take that one off. Why am I wearing a winter coat in spring? Who does this belong to? Oh, I don't know. I can take off the rain jacket. It's not even raining anymore. And I sort of envision it like that, to where I'm just shedding things that I don't actually need. And that might be a help for you as well. And then also, it may be joy that's actually trying to express and stabilize, because a lot of us are moving towards happiness, and this is calling in negativity because it's more familiar than joy and happiness. And so we're actually just unstable in our ability to maintain our happiness and our new way of being and new neural pathways. So start strengthening them, to where sometimes when things are coming in hot and heavy, and I didn't do these 2 times, but I'm going to try it next time, because I'm telling you, there's victory pose. I don't know what the hell is going on, and I feel like shit, but I'm saying at the end of the day, I'm going to show up and I'm going to win. I'm going to remember to say, how do I want to show up here? And I can tell it's not this, but instead of beating myself that I've shown up this poorly thus far, I'm just going to change it right now. Instead of going into any guilt or story, I'm just going to change it from this moment. Okay, I'm just calling in victory preemptively, look at me. Or I could use superhero pose and be like, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to have happiness, you know? I'm calling in happiness. Look at me confidently standing and changing my biochemistry, okay? So that's what those 2 poses do. Or you can dance. Give the feelings a dance and then ask joy, do you want to express itself? Or laugh. Watch something funny, even though it doesn't feel congruent. Sometimes you have to put in effort to feeling and doing and being who it is you really want to do and be from now on. That's the same with weight loss. It's the same with exercise. It's the same with not biting your fingernails, or what are some other bad habits that people try to stop? Negative thinking. Like sometimes you actually have to not just stop them, but do something else that's more congruent with who you want to be. And so, yeah, it might feel a little bit fake at first, but you will notice that when you're expressing joy, that once you make that, things actually do start to change. And you do start to feel more like yourself. You do start to like yourself better. A smile comes on your face. You have more ease. You're actually more likely then to ask the question, does this even belong to me? Do I even need to do anything right now? No, nothing at all. Because I'm actually letting joy start to run through my system, and that's always and will always be more congruent with who you truly are, because it is what you truly are, okay? So it might feel fake at first. That's just because you're changing your chemistry. Let me just end this by saying there is nothing wrong with you. This is all, sadly, normal as far as very common, because we've all been habituated, conditioned to, and become comfortable with being broken, with overly processing, with thinking that something's wrong, with trying to emotionally caretake and take things energetically that aren't ours. We don't have to do this anymore. So that when there are times when it seems like nothing is working, it's because it's not yours. It's not true to you, so you just don't have to do it anymore. Just throw off one of those jackets and walk forward with less weight. That's all you got to do. Who does this belong to is your question. That's an amazing tool. Make sure to follow it with a pause, a breath, or a smile to give a space for the awareness to come in. And then also just trust that this too shall pass. Okay? Because it always does, and you will always end up shining at the end, because that's who you are. All right. Thank you so very much for joining me on this magnificent return to Power Hour after a very transformative trip. I look forward to sharing more bits and pieces with you in the following weeks and months. I also invite you to Happiness Brain Training, which will be starting later this month, and Love Yourselves, which is also coming out at the beginning of the year. And I can't wait to talk to you more about that, but we're at the end of Power Hour, so it'll have to wait. Oh, I can't wait. Okay, I look forward to talking to you next week. I love you dearly, and I hope you have an amazing day and remainder of the week. Alrighty, I'll talk to you next week. Mwah.